Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Indie Diarist podcast, a show on the human stories behind indie game development. This is your loyal Indie Diarist and host, Anthony L. Wolf, writer, narrative designer, and senior content manager in social media, as you guys already know from other episodes. And this one is, well, aside from being episode 50, which is already a pretty big number, this is a very special episode with an incredible guest from the Discord server. And if you're not in the Discord server, you can find a link in the indiediarist.com or also in the description of the show. Alex is one of the first members of the Discord server, and it's amazing that we finally got to record something together. But before we get into the episode, I want to shout out to my amazing patrons as usual, Feinoko, Zagini, Fishbump Dev, and Peleg. You guys are incredible. I love having your support every single month. My Patreon tiers start from as little as £1.25 per month, and the tiers include access to episodes in advance, access to an archive of uncut video versions of episodes, and a lot more. And you can join the Patreon by going to the link in the description or to patreon.com/theindiediarist. But now, let's get into Indie Diary number 50 with Alex Burton. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Indie Diarist podcast, the show on the human stories behind indie game development. This is your loyal Indie Diarist and host, Anthony L. Wolf, as you've heard from the intro as usual. And today with me is someone who's very special guest that comes straight from the Discord server, and in fact was one of the very first people to join the Discord server once it was renamed to the Indie Diarist, because before it used to be something personal of mine, so it had like a lot of friends and such, but then it became the Indie Diarist, and Alex here was one of the first people to ever join the community. So Alex, please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you're based, and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I'm Alex, I'm from the United Kingdom. So basically I spent a couple of years, it was about a decade actually, working on a fictional setting where it's based on the real world, but there are supernatural creatures sort of hidden away in the shadows, if you like. And originally I wasn't even necessarily going to do game design. I mean, I always had the idea in the back of my head of doing a video game. But initially I was just going to write stories. And then one day I just decided that I really wanted to do a video game. So at first I started working on an RPG, but that's quite intensive. As you
it can be.
Yeah. That's still being worked on. I'm actually working on that with a collaborator at the moment, but that's sort of on the back burner, as it were. It's still being worked on. It's just not right out and up front, if you like. And so what we've been working on is a visual novel, which is sort of more of a slightly easier introduction to the world, both for us developers and for the players in a way, because it can ease people in. It's actually free on Steam right now. I'm actually looking at trying to get it onto other platforms as well. It's Harold World, What's Past Is Portents. I play on the phrase What's Past Is Prologue, as I'm sure you're aware. The Portents comes from the title of the RPG, Harold World, Portents in Red, and because it's supposed to lead into it. And sort of right now I'm sort of working with a collaborator, well, the illustrator, on more stories for the visual novel, because rather than one long narrative, it's going to be short stories. So the initial release was free, but it just has one of the stories, and then we're going to do a DLC, which will just have all the additional stories in it. Probably going to release them sort of sporadically, but you'd only pay once for the initial DLC.
All right, okay.
Right?
That sounds perfect. And actually, I mean, we're going to have a chance to talk about Hard World a little bit more as we go further into your story. But I've been following your journey ever since the beginning. Ever since not the beginning, but ever since you joined the Indie Diarist podcast community. And it's been an interesting journey. I've seen you work on the RPG. I've seen you then start working on the visual novel, and I think it's an interesting approach actually to
Mm.
do some world building and introduce some characters and some players to what will then become the RPG. And I think it might be the winning move there, because it could be that in that niche, a lot of people enjoy visual novels in the genre. But we'll get there. And as you know, on these episodes, I always like to open with a little icebreaker aside from the introductions, which is, if you could be any game's character for a day, who would you be and why?
I suppose one of my favourite games is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It was actually a big inspiration on me. And I suppose the protagonist in that, it's not really I mean, you'll have a set model, but it's not really a set character. You sort of build it in yourself, which sort of works for the RPG. So I suppose that sort of seems like a bit of a cheat answer, really. But
no, but I like it. I mean, it's I think there's something deeper in there, in the sense that I mean, I do want to be a character in the universe, maybe, but I also want to be my own character. So I want to become whatever person I will become in that universe. And I have started playing Vampire the Masquerade. Never played it until recently, and I was really surprised by the amount of customization you can do at the beginning. Like, you can really flesh out your character, and I don't know what happens if you change your lineage. Or your class, so to speak, and if you get a different beginning with different characters and such. I suppose you do, because I started with the noble class, and I know there are others. So I wonder what happens if you do choose the others, and what kind of experience you get. But it sounds like it was a really impressive game, and I can see why it's so beloved in the community.
Yeah, it's actually a really big inspiration on me. Yeah. It's actually what started me working on my own setting in the first place.
All right, okay.
I was intrigued by the basic concept, so that vampires and other creatures could exist in the world, and we don't know about them. That was inherently fascinating to me, in a way that I'd watched vampire media before. I'd seen films, and I was relatively positive towards it, but it isn't like it is for me now, where it's actually, I'm deeply into it. It's just that basic idea, and it's sort of that idea sort of ingrained in my head, and I sort of rolled with it over a number of years until I had what's hopefully an interesting and distinct setting of its own. But it comes from that core idea. A lot of things come from these core ideas, and people can go different ways with them. And so it's, I have to give it its dues. It was very important in my career.
Well, I can imagine that, and I can see why. And well, when you think about, and as you know, in these episodes, I always like to start from the beginning. But when you think about your early years, like your first gaming experiences, like, what's your earliest memory that involves video games?
So it would have been sort of PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2. And I would,
my era,
I would see a lot of. I'd actually watch my brothers play it a lot, more than play it myself initially. I do particularly remember there was a game called Medieval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people say it's clunky and it doesn't hold up well. I think it's still a good game. I still enjoy playing it.
Yeah, it's something very atmospheric about it.
Yeah.
And at that time, I wasn't massively into these sorts of things. It's funny thinking back about some of the things I was interested in before, and it almost seems inevitable that I would end up in a situation where I'm really interested in vampires and the supernatural and all that sort of thing. Because that didn't really take off for me late until sort of mid to late teens, when I really started to develop this interest.
Right.
But I suppose there was little things before that, so I wasn't entirely opposed to it before. It just hadn't quite flared in me yet.
You basically answered my next question, which was, do you think the games that you were playing growing up have an influence on what you're making now? And I suppose bit by bit they did lead you here. So other than Medieval, what other kind of games do you remember playing?
We had 2 Lego games. We had Lego Star Wars and Lego Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I love them. Yeah.
Completely unrelated, but
completely unrelated, but yeah.
Yeah, those. I think those were quite early ones, so I believe they're quite different now in a way.
Yeah, no, that now they're super different. Now they have voice acting. Before they had just slapstick comedy and just grunts and voices and whatnot and noises. But yeah, no, now they have fully fledged voice acting. They have a story. I was surprised to last year play the Skywalker Saga, which is the latest one they put out in Lego Star Wars, and I was expecting like a remake with new, like a remaster maybe, or a remake with new graphics of the original Lego Star Wars. No, it's like a third-person shooter or something. It's got a huge HUD. I was like, what is all this stuff? What is the skill tree? What do you mean? Lego Star Wars wasn't like this.
What world are we in where Lego games are some of the most advanced games out there?
Yeah, it's super advanced. I was like, what the hell is this? I did not remember Lego Star Wars being like that. The earlier ones, they're just like Lego Harry Potter, those ones as well. Those were just, with kind of isometric. It wasn't really isometric, but kind of isometric view. Kind of a little bit far from the player. But in that case, it was like third person with like camera behind your back kind of game. And it was fully action with lightsabers and shooters and whatnot. I was like, this is not what I remember. Completely different.
That's crazy. That
I wasn't expecting that. And the thing is, I didn't watch any trailers going into it because I was like, oh yeah, no, it's just going to be just like the originals, but maybe with improved graphics and maybe new game, the new trilogy made in a slightly different way. No, it was the complete overhaul of the entire game and the entire saga. So it was a massive job. And as far as I know, it also got decent reviews. But anyway, I'm digressing.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think I'm curious about one thing. At some point, you said that you you started. At some point, you realized that you wanted to make a game yourself. So when did that happen, and what kind of triggered that moment, if you remember that?
I think it was late. Was it December 2020? Would have been around there, yeah. I believe it was. And because it'd always sort of been in the back of my mind, but it's like, I'm going to do this in the future when, when hopefully I've got a bit more popularity behind me. But I'd spent a lot of time in my own head because, as I mentioned before, it wasn't necessarily originally intended specifically for video games, and I'm still looking at doing other works within the setting that aren't necessarily video games. But I spent so much time in my own head thinking about how long books have to last, and all these things, to the point where it was starting to become not fun for me anymore. I needed to revitalize that interest, and it was just in my head like, I want to make a video game, which is almost feels slightly ridiculous as like, oh, you can't do a book, now do a video game.
Yeah, because it's so much easier.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's it sort of reignited that interest in me.
That's good though. Yeah.
I mean, it's a different set of challenges, even with the visual novel, because the visual novel has similarities to a book, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
But there are different challenges and with that, which are interested in their own right. And there are different things you can do with visual novel you can't do with a book, and vice versa.
Yeah, like I suppose one of the challenges might be you have to learn about data structures, because as soon as you start introducing nodes and choices, then at that point you just have to find a structure that works for branching narrative, and that isn't the easiest. And then all the ways to keep track of player choices and whatnot. So yeah.
I'm forever frustrated by programming. I mean,
tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's what really gets me is like, it can't, like, for some reason there'll be a minor mistake.
Yeah,
but it can't tell me what it is.
It'll break everything.
Yeah, minor mistake. I break everything. Won't tell you what it is. It'll tell you the line, maybe, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And it's like, they'll be like, oh, I forgot to put in a semicolon. Or I put a semicolon in the wrong place, or something like that. And it's so small, and it's like,
Yeah.
You know what I want to do. Just let me do it. And
you should be smart. You
Yeah.
should know what I want to do.
Yeah, you should know what I want to do. It's so close. You know it's wrong, but you don't know how to fix it for me.
I totally relate. Like as you guys know, in the Discord server, I did 2 courses over the past year or so. And one was in just computer science and programming, and one was specifically in game development. Both were super rewarding and super fulfilling in their own right, but also they had a lot of challenges that were similar to this. Is in, okay, I know exactly what I want to do now. Why is it not working? This is supposed to be working. Why is it not working? One of the stupidest things and that was my mistake, but one of the stupidest things that I did during the game development course was part of that course, like a big part of that course is using Love2D and Lua. And that is like a framework. It's like a state machine. It's not an engine.
Yeah.
So a lot of things you have to hard code yourself. As in, okay, you have to render and screen this. Of course, there are love methods and such that help you out, but it's a lot more low level than something like Unity or Godot, for example, where you have the engine and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things that I did, it was one of the assignments was inspired by Zelda, and you had to do a Zelda-inspired game, or at least change a Zelda-inspired game to add a few things from the assignment. And at some point, you had to like change state to carry pots, and I couldn't get the freaking animation to render on screen for the life of me. The hitbox would move, the player would move, but the animation wouldn't render. Turns out I had to manually tell the game to render the animation in the script of the pot, and I was like, "You are loading the animation, and you're rendering everything else. Why the hell can't you work this out?"
Yeah.
But it took me a full afternoon to understand that was the mistake. I learned a lot, but I also bashed my head against the wall a couple times. So, so yeah, but I do relate with that. I do relate. And you know, and someone listening to this will be like, "Oh yeah, but that's an obvious rookie mistake." I know, I know, but you kind of give these things for given as you approach programming for the first time. And I can see
everything's obvious to someone who knows.
Yeah, of course.
Like, you can, I'm sure even the most advanced programmer will make what other people may deem rookie mistakes from time to time.
We had someone in the Discord server just the other day saying, "Oh yeah, well, when I commented, I was like, oh yeah, they mistakenly iterated over a list's keys instead of values," and I was like, "Yeah, I do that." And I wouldn't expect like a seasoned, super experienced programmer who's also a software developer in their full-time day job to do a mistake like that, and yet they do. So everybody makes these silly mistakes, and at some point you can just be frustrated with yourself and move on. So but yeah, so well, I guess we will have. You may have quite a few things to say around the next challenge, around the next question, then. Which is there a particular development challenge, a specific development challenge that has left a mark on you, and any big learnings you want to share with other devs?
So I've been quite fortunate in that I have the help of a more experienced game developer now, which I didn't have at the beginning. And they've been helping with the RPG, and they're a lot more advanced and they've actually got a very diverse skill set. But initially I was just doing it on my own. And what it was often the case is I couldn't find the exact problem I was having, because not many people make vampire RPGs. So, like, no one's putting in how to make feeding work for vampires. Nobody's putting that in. So I had to work out in my head.
Yeah, like creative problem solving. Yeah. Like, what are the steps that will take you to feeding?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually I did get it working. It's quite basic, really. Basically they have the sort of the normal humans, the pedestrians have they have health, and when you feed, you take off health. Yeah, and it's simple as that, really.
And you add it to yours, of course. So it's like a drain effect.
Yeah. So you take that off. But of course, it's not really one transferring to the other. It's taking away from them and adding to you.
Yeah.
It's technically different things. And then, but there's also, the player also has health and blood, so that's two different things, but they both go up from it. And also things like I was trying to work out how to get an interesting thing going with the camera, which is quite complicated.
Yeah, cameras are a pain to work with.
Yeah. Particularly because, again, not many people have this need to work out how to do that in this situation. It's not like a cutscene; it's like something that's player initiated.
Yeah, and like, one of the things that I stumbled upon, well, not stumbled upon, but that I had to kind of realize when I was playing on my final project for the game development course was, I love Hollow Knight's camera, but how the hell do you achieve that?
Yeah.
Because it's not a camera that follows the player at all times. It's a camera that pans depending on where you are in the map and where you are maybe in the screen. And it follows you with a little bit of trailing. But when you jump up, the camera doesn't always jump up because it would give you vertigo. Yeah. And I'm sure some people will have look for it, but if you're looking for something super specific, like in your case, like how do you make feeding work, then you kind of have to work it out as you go.
Although the main thing I struggled with that was the animation, which I never really got entirely working. But we've started a new build with the RPG on the Unreal Engine. So the original build I was working on Unity, and when I started working with this collaborator, so the developer, we decided to move over to Unreal.
Okay.
We made that decision for two main reasons. What I didn't initially realise is how badly some people view the Unity engine. It's got a bad reputation generally. And if I want this RPG to go as far as I want it to go, I'm going to have to do it on another engine, And Unreal just, it's just one of the most marketable engines. And that's actually what a lot of stuff comes down to, is marketing, is how people perceive things. And the other reason was when they introduced the new, what's it called, where you have to pay a license fee after a certain amount.
Yeah, the Unity,
license fee. I mean, I feel like people may have overreacted a little bit to that. But the perception of that was far more important to me. Because of how people were even worse coming to view the Unity engine. Where people were actively saying, we're not going to play Unity games. And so where does that leave me? So we took that decision to move that over. So, and they've been working a lot on the new build. Unfortunately, they're a lot more experienced than I am. And once the visual novel or the DLC stories are done, I will move over more to the RPG as well. But they're also working. They're also doing the illustrations, so they're actually doing quite a lot. But I'm making sure they're properly compensated, of course.
All right, that's good.
I mean, we've come to an understanding, but I always make sure they get paid, even if I don't. And in many ways, I feel more comfortable with this arrangement, because that means they're always taken care of, and all I have to worry about is making sure I get money. Which is actually not as bad in many ways, because I'm not having to explain to another person why they're not going to get money.
Exactly.
I can just look at the numbers and know why I'm not getting money.
Exactly.
And so, and it makes me, I just feel a lot more comfortable with that as the arrangement. So, and in many ways it makes sense because I'm the one with the vision, and it's sort of, and whatever happens, I will always be sort of the, I believe they call it a narrative designer, I think, for video games.
Narrative designer,
I believe that's what they call it. I didn't call it that in the visual novel. I just said that I was the writer, programmer, and executive producer, but that's because it was a visual novel. I thought that made more sense. But for the RPG, I'll probably put narrative designer because I believe that's the technical term they use.
But are you like the narrative designer, or are you the game designer at that point? Because you're the one with the vision, and you're the one just leading the project. So.
I think I think it's called a narrative designer, where they're sort of in charge of the story and the vision. I think that's what it's called.
It's like the two terms that kind of sometimes work.
Yeah.
They blend together.
Yeah.
Because game designers like to write stories as well. Oftentimes, narrative designers are specialized in stories. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, with indie games, it's often common to wear multiple hats.
Exactly. So
yeah, and actually,
totally common.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I struggle with is promotion and marketing.
Yeah, we know. We know. No, we often talk about it in the Discord server. In fact, listeners, if you do, if you are struggling with marketing, we do have a marketing channel in the Discord server. It's called Marketing Sanctum. And we often talk about marketing in there. It's always very rewarding. We've got some marketers in the server too. Jackie Martin, Maneki. So they are great marketers, and I even did an episode with them. So but yeah, I know you struggle with marketing. Yeah. It's tricky.
I may have mentioned it once or twice.
And actually, that is a nice segue into the next question, and I'll ask you what I had in mind for the actual next one later. But what's it like to work on a project in such a hyper-specific niche? Because it's not just, like right now, especially with your current one, it's not just about vampires. It's a visual novel about vampires, which is not hugely marketable in itself. Yeah. So how's it working out for you, and where are you finding the struggle?
So that's interesting. Trust me to pick something so niche without actually not entirely realizing it. I mean, I realized with the visual novel aspect that it was going to be quite niche. So there are visual novels with vampires, but most of them aren't like mine, shall we say. They often have a very different style. Like a lot of visual novels, they're often sort of based around sort of Japanese styles, like anime.
Of course.
Mine's more sort of dark gothic, and also the content is quite different. So they're often things like dating simulators and things like that. Whereas mine is, well, again, dark gothic. So sort of. So but there are
like a horror experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to avoid the word horror because it's so general.
Too generic.
Yeah, horror can mean almost anything. Horror can mean vampires. Horror can mean a slasher. Horror can mean
goals and whatnot. So
can mean almost anything. And so, I mean, maybe I should use it more. I don't know, but when I think about the word horror, I think, well, it's just very general, and it can mean all sorts of things.
It can, true.
So,
but yes, sorry, I interrupted you there, but you were saying about the niche.
So when it comes to visual novels, I always knew that was gonna be different. But there has been examples of successful vampire visual novels in a similar style. Not many, but there's a few examples. And and I thought, why not give it a try? And I mean, with the first one being free, then there's no price for admission, so people don't really have the same. There's nothing really to lose if you try it. And then
they're less stingy if they don't like the game.
And I think I've been quite clear with what it is, how long it is, what it's for. I think all those things can be seen on the store page. That some people apparently can't read. But that is what it is. But
that's what it is. Yeah. Some people just see the trailer, they're like, "Oh yeah, this looks cool. I'll download it. It's free."
But I think I've been quite clear of what it's for and what my plans are for it. So, so that's and part of the reason I decided to make it free is it's quite short. Of course, there are going to be multiple stories, but there's only one story at launch. So, so it's, and then, so if I make it free and then I just say how long it should take to complete, I think that's reasonable. Not all stories are going to be War and Peace.
Exactly, yeah.
And this isn't meant to be, in many ways, it's not meant to be a thing on its own. It exists as
it's like an introduction to,
This is like, an introduction, So this is like, here's a little taster of the kind of things you can expect. And I think it will be sort of slowly introduce themes, concepts, and factions and characters. That will be important in the RPG and the setting generally. But in terms of the sort of the wider picture of how niche it is, there isn't really. When you look at RPGs, most RPGs are fantasy RPGs, like high fantasy RPGs, like
classic castle and princess and whatnot.
So this is vastly different. So, there have been similar attempts before, by indie developers. Not all that successful.
Are we thinking of the same one? It could be
potentially. I mean, there's some variation in it. Like there's some. I know there was a bit where there was a few attempts of people doing vampire MMOs, which
not familiar with those, but
which didn't really work out. I mean, one just sort of. One sort of started and then the developers fell off the face of the earth after taking people's money. So that's not great.
Definitely not.
And then another one people were really hyped for and then were really disappointed by. Not naming any names or projects. And then and I've had, I've done research, I've looked on Kickstarter and see what there is, and there is a couple of examples, not a lot of examples, maybe less than you expect, or maybe the amount you'd expect. I don't know. Depends how many you expect. There is a lot of stuff there, and a lot of it. I think maybe part of it is that not some of them. I think maybe just wanted to do it. Like. Not all of them seem to have a vision, really.
Which makes a big difference when it comes to these things. Because
because one thing I've got is a vision. It's a big vision, a big vision. It's an ambitious vision, but it's a vision. And I think when you're just doing it because I don't know if you just doing it because you want money or because you think it's kind of cool, but you don't really know what you want to do with it.
If you just want to try it out, then you haven't quite thought it out as you should have, and then of course it doesn't feel as fleshed out. Well, I mean, I'm curious then at this point. Well, first of all, I want to know, you mentioned that before you were working on books and such, but let's go all the way to the beginning of that. Like, what inspired Harrowed World in the first place? What would you say was the one thing, the one idea that made you say, I want to write this now, and this is the kind of... it may have changed over time, but this is the kind of concept that I have for this world.
So I initially didn't start with the story. I started with the setting notes.
Okay.
And I spent about a decade working on those before I did anything else with them.
Wow. Familiar with that. I write dystopian novels, so that is pretty much how it works.
Yeah. So basically, I was just writing down characteristics, society information, factions, all those sort of things, and sort of revising over time in what is probably the worst notes making system you've ever seen in your life. No, it's like really bad. Like, so I'd make notes and then each year I would end up making a new section for that year and making new notes.
Okay.
Some would supersede the previous notes, some wouldn't.
Okay.
Wouldn't make sense to any other human being at all.
Yeah.
And things are all over the place. But I sort of understand what I'm doing, so that's the important thing.
That's the important thing. Yeah, well, it's your note system.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, it's sort of like then. I'd come up with concepts, and then I might refine them. So then I'd write them again in the revised ways. Other things wouldn't get revised, but would remain in place in previous years, and then sometimes I'd realise that things would need revising because other things were revised. I think but it got to the point where I sort of got a good understanding of what many of the aspects I wanted them to be like, and ultimately until things appear in a story or in a game, they're not technically finished. Like they can still, I can still add things until. I can always add things and revise things until they appear. And I can always add on to things as long as they don't contradict what's already been established. So there's room for variation and for growth still. But I think the main ideas, particularly for the vampires, are quite solidly down. Like the factions and things. Like I know what they are and I know what their characteristics are.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time with them. And I sort of spent, I think most of the thing that I spent doing is just thinking about it. Thinking about vampires and creatures in ways that most people don't think about them. Which is sort of inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you think about all sorts of weird shit, and, and then you just have to put it together. So,
yeah.
And it's a fascinating part of the process. You just you come up with ideas and you merge them together, and then you find yourself daydreaming about this or that creature, or this or that villain, or this or that character, this or that awful thing that another human being would probably never think about because it's so scary. But at the same time, you find fun in that because you're telling a story and you have a vision. And speaking of a vision, actually, you've mentioned your vision a couple times. I suppose you don't want to spoil it too much. What I'm going to ask you, though, is what is one thing that you wish every player who played Harrowed World, either the visual novel or the RPG, got out of the game and the experience?
So when it comes to the RPG, the big thing is, and it's even the tagline I've got for it: unleash your inner vampire.
Hey, okay.
So you create the character and you become it. For the visual novel, the tagline is "New vampires for a new age." And for the DLC, I'm thinking having a slightly revised tagline, which is "New vampires, new stories, new age." Might be the other way around when it comes to vampires and stories, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the point of that is that actually sort of gets to kind of the heart of, in many ways, what I'm trying to do. Even more than the tagline for the RPG, because it sort of represents, there's a greater representation in that. It's sort of how I perceive how vampires are often seen and depicted in media nowadays. I believe there's a bit of it's a bit stilted, a bit in some ways stale, because they keep revisiting the same characters and the same stories,
the same concepts and such.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think you should forget the past. The past is important.
No, but it's important to also add to that past.
Yeah. So I think that it's how many times do we need to retell Dracula?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Dracula
retellings were full of them.
Yeah, we know.
I liked
Dracula.
Vampire from Dontnod, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, technical wise on PS4, it was a mess. But when it comes to, the story and the kind of story that it told, it was really interesting. I liked it. The fact that you are turned into a vampire, you don't quite know why, but you're also you're also a doctor, and there was that morality problem, and that was the thing that I loved the most, because you were like, okay, do I kill this person? Do I not kill this person? even if I kill them, do they deserve it? Am I a judge of fate? Who am I to judge someone's life? So it made you ask some important questions, also because you were a doctor, and you kind of and I liked that. It wasn't the usual vampire story. It wasn't Twilight. So,
well, that's the plus in itself, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, vampire's an interesting one. So again, and actually, when it comes to sort of established game companies, people like to use terms like AAA games. There isn't actually that many examples of vampire games of this kind, either, even in established companies. Like a lot of examples of vampires in games is vampires are the enemy and you are killing them.
Yeah.
And vampire was
like in The Witcher, for example.
Yeah, like in The Witcher or all sorts of things, really. So vampire's an interesting one because it represents actually the most modern example of a vampire game.
Yeah, despite being set in Victorian times, those Gothic times, I mean, it just works.
Yeah. But in terms of when it was made, it was most recent, really serious attempt at a vampire game where you play the vampire since from a AAA company since Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines in 2004. So, and vampire is it's interesting. I think one of the problems with it is it doesn't entirely know what it wants to be. That's my feeling. I mean, on one hand, it wants to be this deep, introspective story with choices, and and on the other hand, it's trying to be Dark Souls.
Now, the combat didn't quite work. That was one of the things that I didn't enjoy about that game.
Yeah, and not only is it trying to be Dark Souls, as is apparently true in a lot of. I've actually read a few different reviews of it, and they often say that the combat's trying to be Dark Souls, but it doesn't even do it well. So
I think maybe they try to implement those mechanics to make it more marketable and more appealing to a wider public, because they're Dontnod, so after Life is Strange they had huge bump in popularity and whatnot. So they maybe they had some external pressures to make it a little bit more user friendly. But without the combat, or with a simpler style of combat, more focus on the story would have probably been a bit of a better game there. But and
I mean, I honestly didn't like how focused it was on combat to begin with. I think there should be combat, but I think that the story should have related more to the story. A lot of it is there's just random enemies about and you've got to kill them, and it's and which wouldn't actually be too bad if they didn't respawn. So so there's no, like, besides getting XP, there isn't really any incentive to kill them because you're not achieving anything. So you're not clearing an area because they'll come back as soon as you've been to bed and you've done, which is exactly what it is when you go to bed and you come back up. They're back again. Yeah,
they're back. Yeah.
And the XP thing is actually one of the other things I don't like about it. So when it comes to the feeding mechanics, so you have to kill to feed, which wouldn't have been my choice, but fine, I can see the logic there. One of the things that bothers me most about that is the fact that you actually don't have to feed. Really, you feed to get XP. So at what point it's no longer about survival, it's about
exactly
XP.
I think it would have been more interesting if you had to feed, and so you had no choice but to feed sometimes, and so that brings you like that moral dilemma. Because otherwise you die. You can feed on other vampires, but that's not really a moral dilemma. They just brain dead, so you perceive them as zombies, really. But no, but that's an interesting game. I liked what it tried to do, but I do agree that it had some things that they needed to be a little bit more ironed out. And I guess, we're getting to the end of the episode. I can't believe how fast it's gone. But this is the question that I love to ask to everybody, and I feel like you'll have an interesting answer here. Right. So, why are you a game developer, Alex? What is it that drives you forward?
Right, that's an interesting one. So, I suppose technically I am a game developer, even if I do have help from another game developer.
Yeah.
But I see myself, I suppose, as a storyteller in a sense. So rather than specifically game design, it's storytelling. So there are different kinds of storytelling. So books and video games are, in where I see it, another avenue for storytelling. Obviously, it's a very different medium to books, different challenges, because it's interactive. So you don't tell the story in the same way. But a lot of, for me, it's about the story and the way you're telling it. So games can tell different stories to books, and I think it's sometimes undervalued, the importance of video games. Some people look down on them, but they're one of the biggest industries in the world, and they can be enjoyed by all sorts of people, all sorts of ages, all sorts of backgrounds. They're for everyone, and not every game will be for every person, but there's lots of different games out there that can appeal to lots of different people.
Yeah, and I read something recently about the value of video games as a form of art. And it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. I've always believed that video games can be a form of art, and actually they are art already. And there was this article talked about the fact that we'll still carry the legacy. We're still affected by the legacy of Roger Ebert, I think, who was a cinema critic who passed away. But it was a hugely well-respected cinema critic. But at some point, he said that video games can never be a form of art, and that triggered an entire discourse because, of course, he was a child of his age, I suppose, of his era. So he grew up as a cinema critic, as a film critic, grew up with cinema. So he was deeply into cinema, but I don't think he ever quite got video games. But that conversation is still going on today because a lot of people still believe that video games are not really that much of a form of art, and I wholeheartedly disagree. Because they bring together so many things, and plus they're interactive. They're not a passive form of art like other forms of art that have come before them. So it's something that brings immersion to another level. So yeah, well, it's I'm sure it will be revisited as more people, more gamers grow and go into adulthood, and they start writing those things. But yeah. Oh, another good thing actually that came out this week, and this will be old news by the time people will listen to this, but the esports have been added to the Olympics. Like the Olympics committee, I think they've added some esports. They said they don't want to add games that display violence or that have to do with violence. So like something like COD wouldn't be there.
So that cuts out a lot of games.
So that cuts out a lot of games. Probably sports games, those, or like, I don't know, FIFA or those. They will probably keep it to sports. But it makes sense. And for the next edition of the Olympics, there will be esports as well, which I think will help a lot of people rethink video games in a certain way.
It's interesting because the original Olympics didn't just have sporting events. So we're talking about the original ancient Olympics.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
They would have things like painting and artistic things. So
I didn't know that. Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yes, it wasn't specifically just sport. So the idea of Olympics just being sport is actually more to do with the modern Olympics than the original Olympics.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, well, maybe we are getting a bit closer to that.
Yeah.
But that would be interesting to see the Olympics of painting and such. I guess not a lot of people would watch it. I would be, well, you and I would probably be 2 of maybe 10 people on the planet interested in something like that. But yeah, anyway. Right. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. Before we do, I've got 2 more fun questions for you, or interesting questions, if anything. One is, imagine writing a letter to yourself, but the child who was playing Medieval or those PlayStation 1, 2 games, what would you say?
I mean, it's cliche, but never give up.
Right, that's fine. That works.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could just give him all my notes. So all my notes from now.
You could just send it as an attachment on the letter, and just there you go.
Yeah, and then
saved you 10 years of setting notes.
Yeah. So that's all done. So now make a game. Go on.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like 8 or 9 or something, but go make a game now.
Perfect. Okay. And lastly, if you had unlimited budget and time, what game would you make?
Probably the same game that I'm making now, just with more money. I mean,
You know what?
Yeah.
That is, it's not the first time I hear that answer. I hear it at least once every 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah.
And it always warms my heart because it always tells me that this is what, whoever says it, this is what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like, this is the kind of thing that you were born to do, maybe, or at least that you want to do right now. And if you just make the same game but bigger, then you're absolutely on the right path.
Yeah.
So,
And maybe quicker.
Maybe quicker.
Yeah.
That would help.
Yeah.
Quicker. More people means
Quicker. Yeah. And then, more money spent on marketing and things like that.
Yeah. Of course.
Pay someone.
So that would be a pain.
Who knows what they're doing. And then, and then, use that money to do more games.
Mm-hmm.
And I do actually have ideas for more games. Like, with Harold World, lots of different ideas. Some a bit off the rails.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, if you want to build a little Harold World saga with a lot of different genres and things, I mean, that would be an interesting experience. I think it's Daniel Mullins who does a different game every single time, and they're always amazing. Like from Pony Island, I think he's the one from Pony Island. Then The Hex, and recently they did Inscription. So yeah, I mean, you can do wildly different games every single time, and if there's your vision in them, then people are going to enjoy them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because I want to do games for each of the main creatures in the setting, and I want to explore different styles of games. So there'd probably be horror elements in all of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm stuck to traditional horror storytelling or traditional RPGs. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a modern setting. It could be in the past, and it can be in all sorts of environments. So, and I do have ideas which I'm not going to share, but
a secret for now. Then we'll see as we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that is a wrap, I would say. Alex, it's been so lovely talking to you, and finally speaking after having you in the Discord server for so long. I can't believe that it took us about a year to actually do this episode together.
I was just
but it was
lingering there, waiting for the moment.
It was lingering, waiting for the right moment. And fortunately, I had a slot this summer. Well, many slots this summer, and now we're good. So, with that said, where can other people find you? And if they do, what is the best way to support you?
Okay. So I'm all over the place. So there's the Harold World Discord server. There's we're on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Harold World. We're on Instagram and Threads, which is at Harold World Official. Don't ask. Whole thing happened.
Okay.
And also on Tumblr as Harold World. And got a website, www.haroldworld.com.
Okay.
And
of course Steam. Wish was the game on Steam.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Steam, yeah.
Right. Steam, that thing that I'm making.
Yeah. Well, they'll find it. If you find me, they'll find it.
But yeah, okay. Well, then, of course, guys, listeners, you will find all of the links in the description of the episode, so that you can check out Alex and his games, and just reach out to him because he's, as you can see, he's a very approachable and friendly guy. So, and you can also find him in the Discord, in the Indie Diaries Discord server. But please join Harold World's Discord server, because I feel like I need it less. So yeah, just support Alex in any way you can. But yeah, Alex, thank you so much for being part of the show. It's been lovely having you here and just chatting about vampires and horror, not horror, and all of the things that we talked about, stories and vision and whatnot. And I'll speak to you in the Discord server.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, and that's a wrap on another episode of the Indie Diaries podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Alex for being such an amazing guest. I'm glad that we finally made it. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show, leave a rating if you haven't already. 5 stars, 4 stars, anything helps. So long as you don't leave a 1 star, then that might make me come for you. But yeah, so you can find me on social media at the Indie Diaries and pretty much, well, not every platform, but a lot of platforms. You can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Twitter. I will not stop calling it Twitter. You can find me on Threads, where I'm trying to be a little bit more active now that the API has become available and I can finally schedule posts. So yeah, that should be pretty interesting soon. And about the YouTube channel, a lot of things are coming up over the course of, well, over the rest of summer. So I hope that you'll be there for a ride. But you can also find links to patreon.com and Ko-fi if you want to support the show monetarily in any way. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there are a lot of benefits that you can gain by becoming a patron, including access to episodes in advance. And if you're an indie game developer yourself, please get in touch because I would love to feature you on the show. I always have space for amazing stories from the indie game development community.